Welcome back to Monster in My Closet, the podcast where we shine a light on the professional world's darker corners. I'm Anil Saxena, joined by my co-host, the founder of Medusas, Morgan Hunter. Each episode, we tackle the fears and faux pas that haunt our work lives, with insights, interviews, and a dash of humor, some stupid analogies, and probably swearing. So if you've ever felt like you're navigating a workplace labyrinth, a never-ending approval process, an evil hall of mirrors, or a constantly ending quarter, you're in the right place. Let's confront those monsters together. Are you ready? Let's begin. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Monster in My Closet. So Morgan, this week, are we scared or scary?
Scary. Monstrous.
Monstrous. That's pretty scary. So this week, beneath the polished veneer of diversity programs lies the DEI Divide, a ghostly chasm where whispered promises and spectral hopes meet the cold, hard floor of reality. Step into the eerie void with us, if you dare, to unveil the hidden discrepancies that haunt the halls of inclusion. So 3 big things we want to talk about today: the reality of DEI implementation and employee experiences. Second, barriers to effective DEI implementation. And third, best practices and success stories. So we're going to be, why are we talking about this topic? What led us here?
Well, a lot of unpleasant personal experiences that I've had has led us here today because what I have found on the regular is that there can be a lot of positive, wonderful things said in corporate America about things companies are doing to build diversity, equity, inclusion, etc. And it's a good show, man. It's a good show. Like, you feel like you're at a pep rally. Yay, we love everybody and you're included. But man, it just doesn't ring true to my personal experience on the ground. Whether it's myself or peers, etc., I feel like it's a lot of smoke and mirrors and not a true top to bottom commit to making these things happen.
Yeah. I think that it is that notion of, we had this conversation as we were preparing for this episode, this notion of moral licensing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that somehow these DEI programs are going to overcome something that is not necessarily that easy to overcome. So there's a radio host called Charlemagne the God, and he talked about DEI programs on The Daily Show, and he said that that they were a way to morally whitewash away the bias or prejudice in the workplace. It's a start. It's not the solution. And he said, I appreciate the effort, but it can't be, I took the training, check, and now we're unbiased in a post-racial company. Yay! Right? Like it can't be, it's not that easy to do. It's a good first step. It's a good effort in the direction. So why do we feel like we're having to do this? So what is it about creating these programs and rolling out these programs? What makes this sort of catnip for organizations?
Well, I think people understand that society as a whole responds well to corporations that are diverse and inclusive. The numbers show that organizations that have these attributes perform better and are smarter and have better products and all of that stuff. So the numbers are there. So it's like, oh yeah, we're going to do that thing. It's kind of like back in the day when everyone said, we're going to move to the cloud, right? So, okay, but the reality is a little bit harder. And I think one of the big challenges for me isn't how the programs are actually executed. And I don't know that I know the answer. I have ideas, but they're pretty draconian. But, back in the day, we had like a women's leadership conference. in DEI conferences in various companies I've worked for. And they would bring the women or the people of color into a room with some senior leaders peppered in there, and then talk to people about microaggressions. Why are you talking to me about microaggressions? What? I'm the minority. I'm I know what a microaggression is, right?
Right.
I'm this is my daily experience, and it's so frustrating because we get in these rooms and there's senior leaders, and some of them that are bad actors would get up there and like hug that microphone and talk about how important this initiative is. I'm like, you don't even mean that. You don't even mean that. I see you every single day doing horrible and saying horrible things to people. I don't know. It just, to me, it seems very performative. We filled the room with people and everyone's nodding their head because, yes, I do want people to stop doing that to me, right? So everybody seems happy. But the reality is, I think it's the wrong audience they're targeting. I think they need to get the leaders in the room and say, this is how you need to show up. And here's what that looks like in action,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
anything outside of that box, we're going to have discussions, right? So instead of like getting back your employee feedback survey and saying, well, you've got one response that says that you're a misogynist,
Right.
we'll just ignore that. That's an outlier. I've seen that happen. We'll just
Yeah.
ignore that. That's an outlier. No, it's not. I would unpack that shit so fast. It was like, why did someone said that? We need to unpack that, right? But people don't unpack it. They look at it and they just like classify it as an outlier, and then everything goes back to normal, and no one's held accountable. So I will get off my soapbox, Neil, and like,
Well, I think that I mean, but it's not. It's a nice soapbox. I think the underlying issue to me is that there aren't real business measures that are tied to DEI programs that are meaningful in a way that leaders, corporate leaders, can really understand how does being successful in this effort grow our business, increase our market share, expand our horizons beyond our current group of customers. I think that that's part of the notion behind these programs. It's a little bit like we want to introduce this, and so part of the measure is you have to interview a woman or a person of color for every leadership position. Now that's a good idea because it's a good idea, but it doesn't mean that you have a diverse organization. It doesn't mean that you're diverse. It doesn't mean that you're inclusive. It just means that you're interviewing people that are outside of the normal group of people that you'd interview. And so
yeah.
I think that's the part of the challenge is that the easy metrics that we put into annual what do you call those things where you share them with the shareholders and the annual
Mm-hmm.
results, right? That kind
Mm-hmm.
of thing, whatever that word is that I'm looking for. It feels to me like we're a little bit stuck, right? And that's where we need to look: is how do we grow the market share? How do we actually benefit the company? I kind of lump DEI training into like ethics training, right? And you sum this up when we were working together, right? Ethics training is really don't do illegal shit, right? Don't do things that are illegal. If you do things that are illegal, you're going to be fired. And if you do things illegal that are illegal in America or illegal in Azerbaijan or illegal in China, like don't do illegal shit. It reminds me of there's all these people that are going to the St. Croix or Cayman Islands or something like that. They bring ammunition by mistake in their bag, and then the police confiscate them and arrest them, and you can get 12 years in prison for doing that. And they're like, "Well, I didn't know," and it's like, "Well, but that's the law, so you should know that before you go there." And so I think it's the same thing with DEI. It's like, don't do racist shit, don't do misogynist shit, and if you do, there's going to be consequences to pay. That's the part that we're not
Yeah.
necessarily.
And I think it's this, people, I'm sure we're going to get feedback on this. People are like, well, it's so difficult. I don't know what to say now. I mean, how do I know what to say to people? You've like boxed me in. Like if something's about to come out of your mouth and you're thinking, I don't know if I should say this or not, don't fucking say it. I mean, that's how easy it is. Just don't.
Yeah, it really isn't a complicated thing. As organizations, as a society, we change, we evolve, and so if you're unwilling to evolve because it's difficult, that's a totally different conversation. It's a little bit like when in the years ago, right, in a land far, far away, there was a time where we didn't have computers at work, and uh, we were rolling out computers at an organization that I worked with, and there were people that were like, "I am not going to learn how to use this thing. This is, I don't like this computer." And those people were tolerated, but eventually they left the organization because that was the way that we were going to do things. Why is it any different?
Mm.
Why is that notion of we're going to everything's going to move to the cloud, everybody's going to work virtually? What's the difference between that and thinking about how you operate around different types of people? It's
Do you think
illogical.
do you think that corporates have difficulty holding their senior executives to these standards? So I'll give you an example. Let's say your head of sales brings in the numbers and exceeds those numbers every single quarter, and he has 37 HR complaints against him. You fire him? I mean, I I feel like in our previous episode, when your best is a beast, right? And please go watch that if you're listening and you haven't watched it or listened to it yet. But it's this idea that you have this one skill set that the company falls in love with, and they get blinded to like everything else is going on, and then they don't want to lose their best person because they're making the numbers or they're closing contracts or whatever the case may be, and so the behavior just continues. And then, as employees, you look at that and go, well, how can you say that this is not tolerated when I'm seeing it all around me at the highest levels in the company? I mean, I don't understand. Does that person get a pass because they hit their numbers?
Well, I think the reality is that it does happen, but
Mhm.
I think that there's a misconception because that person is hitting their numbers, they get a pass, and it's almost that scarcity mentality that,
Mm.
well, that person is awesome, and if I fire them, I'm never going to find another person like that. Here's the reality check that there is nobody, and I mean nobody, that is not replaceable. That is just, there are, I don't know, 8 billion, 9 billion, a zillion billion. I don't know how many people there are in the world anymore. I lost count. If you lose that one person, you will find another person. That is,
Mm.
that's the truth. And so
Yeah.
to hold on to that individual because, you know, they're really good at their serve, or they have an awesome backhand, or they're good at backslapping with other people that are just like them. That
Yeah.
is, that's the misnomer. So to me, it almost feels like we look at what's the makeup of our clientele versus our current makeup, and what markets or opportunities are we missing by not looking more like our clients. That feels like a measure that makes sense. It's almost like that salesperson that you identified, that sales leader. What additional markets is he or she opening up?
Hmm.
What other parts of the world are we exploring? Because I can tell you for sure that how we sell in the United States isn't going to work in India. It's not going to work in Sweden. It's not going to work in Brazil. And
Hmm.
we need to be able to communicate in ways that are unfamiliar to us. And that's not just language, right? That's sort of how you operate,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So I'd like to pivot a little bit and talk about, okay, so you're a company who set up a great DEI program, and people are like, yeah, okay, I want to participate in this new world. And this is a topic that's pretty close to me. So, um, one of the things you can do if you have disabilities is you can ask for an accommodation in your workplace. And this is one of the places where I feel like we haven't figured it out yet when it comes to how to really make people feel whole. In my previous job, um, became quite ill and I needed to go and work part time. And so I asked for that accommodation. I got that accommodation. It was great. But I also feel like that it limited my career potential by calling in that card and saying, I'm disabled, I need an accommodation, that I got put on the back burner. And I have seen other examples with people I know where they have gotten sick unexpectedly. I had a friend, she had breast cancer, and she shared that with her employer. And like 2 weeks later, I was in a room with her boss, and that person said, the most qualified person is X, but she has breast cancer, so we're not going to give her the promotion, right? So I feel like they don't have the right to make that decision for you, right? That should have been a decision you had with the person saying, hey, this thing's here, how do you feel about that?
Yeah.
Respond, no, I can't do it. Yes, I can do it. Yes, I can do it under these circumstances, etc. But she was never afforded that conversation. And I feel similarly that I was never afforded any like legitimate career conversations. And it's pretty frustrating because just because you have a disability doesn't mean that you don't have aspirations.
And I think that that's another, to me it's like you have to make sure that the measure of success of do you have an inclusive environment is how many different types of people in different situations are in roles of leadership, are have prominent roles, that sort of thing. I mean, I think it's a misnomer to say that, because we hire 40% of the people that work here are women, we're diverse and inclusive. That's a meaningless number, right? And I think to your point, you have to be able to have an organization where sharing things about your situation or about who you are doesn't stifle your ability to grow. I mean, I think I have
Yeah.
a kind of an opposite experience. I can't travel because of my situation, and I actually got promoted just recently to a senior leader position, and I don't travel.
Well,
And thank you. And I think, but I think that that's proof of that there are
work.
that right that it can work. And so
Yeah.
I would say, I would also say that it's because, and I hopefully I don't get hate mail, or maybe I will, maybe I don't care. I work for a woman, right? And I think I've had the privilege of, I mean, I have a very important woman in my life. I have a daughter, I have a mother. I've worked mostly for women. And I think that there is a different mentality that women bring to the workplace, allows for that expansion of what is successful, right? I mean, my wrestling coach, Mr. Rossetti, he was very different. And he was kind of like my dad, and Mr. Rossetti and other people were my role models as a man. And that's how you go into the workplace thinking that that's what a successful person looks like.
Yeah.
And those are the reasons that DEI training are important, is it shows you the difference, but it's not enough to just put people in a room and talk about why we need to be more inclusive. And then
Yeah.
once we're done, you're done.
Yeah. I think that I would like to see more examples of the system working.
Mm,
And I'll give you another example. I have gotten a lot of feedback about my communication style, right? So, enough, I used to have a coworker, and he would show up to meetings and he'd stand up and say, "I'm an asshole. That's just who I am. Deal with it." Wow. How do you get that club card? I want that. But I feel like if someone were to show up to a meeting and say, "I'm autistic and this is how I communicate,
yeah.
deal with it," that then you're just that autistic person, right? I'm trying to, and I'd love to hear feedback from readers who have actually like played their card and said, in public said, "This is who I am, and this is why I communicate the way I have," and how their company dealt with that, and how did it benefit them or did it backfire on them? I don't know. I'm just really understanding, like, how does it really work when you call the card in on a physical or a mental disability, and how do people react to that over the long term? That's the nut that I want to crack.
Yeah, I think that would be such an interesting conversation. And I think I'd love to hear also some examples of when it has worked and why, right? Like what's the kind of basis of that? So as we're kind of wrapping up our conversation today, I think kind of three big takeaways. One is that DEI training in and of itself is not enough, right? You can't just
Mm-mm.
put people in a room and have an expectation that magic is going to happen. I think the second is that there needs to be some kind of measure that is business, market growth, client growth, that kind of thing that's attached to whether or not you are successful as a more diverse and inclusive organization. And then the third is that there has to be some real consequence for people that don't uphold that value. It's a little bit like if you do something illegal and one of your values is ethics, you should be fired.
Yeah.
It's the same correlation. Anything that you'd add to that,
Yeah.
Morgan?
Yeah. I think that corporations need to think about what is the process that they're going to put in place for people to ask for accommodations.
Mm,
Have a process. Number two, communicate that process. And when I say communicate, I mean that managers and leaders need to be trained. Like, if your employee comes to you with asking for an accommodation, here are the steps that like, it needs to be super clearly communicated. And then to the employees, it needs to be highly communicated. If you need an accommodation, please let us know, and here's how we will, here's how you engage, and here's how we'll respond, and here's how we'll protect you
yeah.
as an employee in that process. So I think that the kind of, again, the operationalizing of something is often missing.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I totally agree with that. All right. So, two things before we wrap up today. So, first, if you like this podcast and you want more people to listen to it, please rate and share it. And if you've gotten this far and you don't like this podcast, please turn it off. Like, that seems ridiculous to me that you're here and you don't like what you're hearing. Don't do that. That's very bad on you. So that's the first thing. Please rate and share. The second thing is that we are having a fundraiser for medusas.org. So please consider donating. Get your organization to get involved with donating. We want to make a more diverse and inclusive SaaS environment where it's safe and pleasurable for everybody to be involved in the SaaS world. So
That is,
that is the
let's,
mission in a nutshell. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Monster in My Closet, and we'll see you next time.
I
As we wrap up another episode here at Monster in My Closet, we want to thank you, our fearless listeners, for joining us on this journey of exploring what scares us or when we're scary. Professionally, of course. Together, we've ventured deep into the workplace wilderness armed with humor, insights, and a touch of irreverence, and hopefully learn something together along the way. But our journey doesn't end here. Monster in My Closet is proud to be part of Medusas.org. Medusas is a membership-driven, non-profit organization serving underrepresented groups, minorities, and individuals with disabilities who are doing business in the software-as-a-service space. We're a community created by SaaS professionals, for SaaS professionals, and even the SaaS curious. Visit Medusas.org to discover how you can contribute to a movement that empowers professionals to face their workplace monsters head-on. Don't forget to subscribe, share with your colleagues, and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us shine a light on the monsters lurking in the professional closet, making our community braver, stronger, and a little bit wiser. Until next time, keep challenging the status quo, embrace the journey, and remember, no monster is too big when we face it together. Cheers.